Daniel Shaver cleared by a jury is heartbreaking, to say the least. And maybe a little bit more heartbreaking than the execution here in Chattanooga of Javario Eagle, who was shot down in two fusillades of bullets, the first one taking him to the ground, and the second involving about 17 9mm, maybe 40 caliber projectiles from police muzzles, killing him when he apparently reached for the handgun he had and aimed it in the direction of an officer. And of course, all the officers, very concerned about the safety of their colleague, opened fire multitudinous times. And then they secured the subject, right? Secure the subject means that they put handcuffs on the man who was bleeding, with mortally wounded, bleeding. And they wanted to make sure that he bled to death with his arms together behind his back, because that way he might not reach from his gurney en route to the hospital where he died, not reach from the gurney, disarm an officer, and shoot said officer. So we want to make sure that the subject is not going to do that. And so we handcuff a man mortally wounded after we rushed, of course, to secure his safety and make sure that he gets the medical attention. Well, this is David Tulis, and the question of the statutorily sanctioned extrajudicial execution of citizens who don't deserve the death penalty is something that is very strongly in view today, with the clearance of Philip Brailsford in Mesa, Arizona. And there's a lot of I'd say there's a lot of bootlicking by conservatives who are shamefully pro-police. Now, I'm pro-police in a sense, but what I'm really for is pro-sheriff. If I have to be pro-anybody in law enforcement, it would be pro-sheriff, because the sheriff is responsible to the people, and the incumbent here in Hamilton County is facing election with at least one challenger from the Democratic Party, Victor Miller, who has not gotten back to me about giving you an interview about his ideas. He is an officer in the Chattanooga Police Department, a detective, and for a time was the PIO. The execution of this salesman. He was a man involved in the killing of bug trades, and he was in a hotel in Mesa, and it was in the evening, and he had, which is a constitutional carry state, by the way. It's a state in which you can carry a weapon, any weapon you want, in public without having to have any kind of proof of identity or proof of purchase or permission. He was at the La Quinta Inn and was having some spirits, some drunken spirits with two other business people at the same hotel, 26-year-old man. And the body cameras that describe his last minutes is one that is to say the least, it is chilling. And what we have is the proprietary interest of the state as against the citizen, right? The ostensibly free citizen of that state. We're here in Tennessee called the free people. We have elected what's called free government, and we have an indefeasible right to overthrow it as we feel fit, right? To change it, to alter it, or abolish it as we feel fit. But we are not in Tennessee. We are the volunteer state, and so we volunteered into a subjection to the policing industry, the judicial police complex, if you call it, the prison industrial complex, fed by the police judicial industrial complex, and maintaining the profit margins for all parties involved. Now, there are reasons from the Word of God to oppose privatization of prisons. So there's reasons from the Word of God to oppose prisons per se. In fact, I asked an elder in a Presbyterian church I visited on Sunday, what does the Word of God say about prisons per se? And he saw pretty quickly that there is no support for it in the scriptures. In other words, prisons are inequitable and unjust. They are not part of justice at all. And they are, however, an American innovation coming from the Quaker world, right? The Quakers who brought us abolition of slavery, the whole abolition movement arising from this sect in Christianity, bringing to account the rest of Christianity in the 1700s and 1800s that had bought into the slavery argument illegally, right? And had bought into the slavery argument unbiblically and uncharitably, and brought in the end judgment by the Yankee armies upon the whole South for this the sin of rejecting the word of God on the slavery issue. There is slavery in the scriptures, and it is regulated, right? The word of God regulates slavery. And so we have prisons that come from the Quakers who were right on one side, wrong on the other, that being the prison mentality, the whole prison complex, which is a state-controlled cartel and industry. We'll hear more about that from Randy Stamps, a former legislator. Now, the graphic video, which you can see on Facebook, just Google Daniel Shaver death, and you'll find it on Facebook or on the websites of the New York Times and other platforms. They say, come out. There's 6 cops. They all Shaver was showing a BB gun he had in his rat shooting, pest shooting business, and so he had someone 5 floors down in the pool saw this weapon and called police. Well, they had the clerk call police, the clerk who knew Daniel Shaver and knew what his business was, and unreasoningly calling police. So that's one reason that you should, I would say, generally don't call police. Right? If you've got a problem, don't call police. That's the last thing you want to do, especially if you have a mental problem. If you're having a son or daughter or a veteran brother who comes home from Afghanistan, he's staying with you for a couple of months, and he's having an episode, don't call police. That's the last thing you want to do. The very last thing you want to do is call 911. Well, someone called 911. The cops came, 6 cops armed with machine guns, right? High-powered 5.6 caliber or 223 caliber weapons, of course, that fire on automatic. And they're in the hallway. They call him out. He shows up. He's a little bit inebriated. He immediately puts his hands in the air, and he lies down on the ground while informing the officer that no one else is in the hotel room. There was a woman there. They were sharing drinks with a man who'd come with her to visit. Daniel Shaver had gone down to call his wife, and so they both came out, and he's got his hands up. He said, and the Sergeant Charles Langley is yelling. Just listen to the screaming in the video. If you make a mistake, another mistake, there is a very severe possibility that you're both going to get shot. Do you understand? He says, and telling Shaver to shut up. I'm not here to be tactical and diplomatic with you. You listen, you obey, the officer says, quoting here from the Washington Post. And so for the next 5 minutes, these officers give instructions to this man. First, an officer tells Shaver to put up both hands on top of his head, and then he instructs him to cross his left foot over his right foot. If you move, we're going to consider that a threat, and we're going to deal with it, and you may not survive it, Sergeant Charles Langley says. The officer then has the woman crawl down the hallway. Okay, here we have, these are slaves. Okay, before the state, you are a slave, period. You are a slave. Just read Rushdoony on that, or read A Secular History of the Rise and Decline of the State by Martin Van Creveld. Holding it up here for you, my listener and viewer on YouTube and on Facebook. A lot in here on how this phenomenon came about. Police are part of the idea of the corporation nation state. The officer then has the woman crawl down the hallway where she is taken into custody. Why? Why would they take into custody this woman? Shaver remains on the ground, his hands on his head. Langley tells Shaver to keep his legs crossed and push himself up into a kneeling position. As Shaver pushes himself up, his legs come uncrossed, prompting the officer to scream at him. I'm sorry, Shaver says, placing his hands near his waist, prompting another round of screaming. You do that again, we're shooting you. You understand, Langley yells. Please don't shoot me, Shaver begs, his hands up straight in the air. At the officer's command, Shaver then crawls down the hallway, sobbing. Okay, at one point, he reaches back, possibly to pull up his shorts, and Brailsford opens fire, hitting him 5 times. According to the police report, the AR-15 rifle has the phrase, "You're effed," etched into the weapon. The police report also says that the shots were fired so rapidly that in watching the video at regular speed, one cannot count them. And Brailsford, the young cop, is his late 20s, full of tattoos. A very courageous man with his tattoos to fortify his sense of courage. He's a man of courage. If this situation happened exactly as it did that time, I would have done the same thing, Brailsford said during the trial. I believed 100% that he was reaching for a gun. And yet that is simply a foolish statement that the jury of peers believed that you can have a gun which is heavy in the weak elastic of effectively boxer shorts or running shorts. That this somehow was able to hold a weapon, and they had seen him. They knew there was no weapon, and yet because the officer convinced the jury that he feared for his life, he was justified in a group of 6 officers, all of them with weapons trained, a highly escalated situation where there's no gap, right? There's no room in their movements for any higher escalation. They're at the highest point, the acme of escalation, and it is an egregious police execution. And I'm going to try to find reasons that you should love it. You should accept it. You should love it. You should appreciate this execution as perhaps an unfortunate mistake, but one that fits with your paradigm and your worldview, which is that the state is first, and that for there to be safety, there are going to be some collateral losses. And many of these collateral losses are like Javario Eagle, the black man here in Chattanooga in 2015, shot down in 2 fusillades of bullets. A man with having a mental episode. In that case, Javario Eagle was having clearly a mental episode because he has an 8-minute phone call with police whom he called. He called them and offered a rambling monologue indicating that he was not in his right mind. And then when the dispatcher heard some screams in the background, family members in the apartment in a government slum, called for a show of force. And that's what happened. There was an invasion of that part of that slum. And another black man went down, like Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Laquan McDonald, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, and many, many, many others. The attorney for Daniel Shaver's name is Mark Garagos, and he says, it's the most chilling, horrific thing you've ever seen in your life. This kid was begging for his life. He raised his hands. He did everything the cops told him to do. And then they just executed him. It's bone chilling. One of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life, in sitting in a courtroom with his widow, who watched it for the second time, and she literally went into convulsions. I had to grab her to hold her in a bear hug. It was just that awful. And how is it that a move is viewed as a threat? A man is on the ground. He's a little bit inebriated. He's in a hotel. He's having a little social occasion. He has caused no disturbance. He's made no threats, not shouted from windows, not aimed the weapon at anybody, nothing of the kind. But there's someone calls the police. Someone called 911. Yeah, call 911. And look what happened. Sergeant Langley then asked if both of them were drunk, and they both responded that they were not. He then told Shaver that he turn his eyes down and look at the carpet and not move. He further instructed that Shaver needed to keep his fingers interlaced on his head and his legs crossed. Sergeant Langley then told Shaver that if he moved, it would be considered a threat, and the officers would have to deal with that, and Shaver may not survive it. Shaver acknowledged, bellowing, "Yes, sir," when asked if he understood this. He's trying clearly to cooperate from the start, but the cops are hostile, yelling at him for trying to ask a question, adding to his fear by shouting that he may not survive. This is from the Atlantic. And giving lots of complicated instructions. It isn't enough for the 6 men with guns that the man is lying on the ground with his hands outstretched and his palms are up. They're ordering him to cross his legs with specific instruction for which leg goes on top. And they want his eyes closed. They want his fingers interlaced on his head. About 16 minutes and 40 seconds on the recording, Sergeant Langley shouts at Shaver, "If you do that again, we're shooting you. Do you understand?" And he stammers, "No, please don't shoot me." He's begging for his life. Shaver's voice appeared to be panicked, and Sergeant Langley shouted that Shaver needed to listen to instructions. At that point, Shaver's arms are above his head with his elbows approximately 90-degree angles. Shaver was ordered to put his hands in the air again by Sergeant Langley, and he pushed his hands high above his head in compliance. And then further down, Officer Brailsford's rifle was primarily pointed down the hall until this movement was made. Officer Brailsford then swung his rifle back towards Shaver, where Shaver could be seen with his braced left hand and his right hand moving back towards his waist with his elbow raised above him. Shaver's head appeared to be down with his face looking at the carpet. What appeared to be multiple voices, including Sergeant Langley's, then began to say, "Don't!" as Shaver's hand moved back toward the front of his body. When his hand moves toward the front, it is very slightly bald, and his thumb is toward the officer. Officer Brailsford fired his first shot as Shaver's hand was moving toward the front of his body, and as at least one officer was heard saying, "Don't." And he was pulling his pants up. He was pulling his pants up, which had come down. And when you see pictures of his dead body after this summary execution of a man who did not deserve capital punishment, they are somewhat leading in the near the crack of his backside. What's really interesting about this is that the officer Brailsford's father, who was a former cop in Mesa and an attorney, had complete access to the whole scene before these cops made their report. And that is according to, there's a picture of him here. Jerry Lynn Ward, the attorney in Texas, points this out. When the cops were in the elevator, two things here. Brailsford is the second generation Mesa police officer. His father was a veteran, spent 10 years, and then became an attorney. The dad met with each of the 6 officers before they even gave their post-incident report. Every report left out that Daniel was sobbing for his life. Okay. Brailsford's report said that he feared for his life. Well, why is that? Because the deceased was crawling towards him, and he believed Daniel was trying to get a tactical advantage. 2 questions. Earlier, he admitted Daniel was commanded to crawl towards them. So you're commanded to crawl towards them, and then when you do, they say that you're trying to take advantage of them. All 6 powerful military weapons aimed in a constitutional carry state, Arizona, aimed at a man in basketball shorts, and he is shot down. And the cops, when they were going up the elevator, were just playing games, right? They were just playing around, swapping magazines before they went into formation, right? And in the SWAT mentality, the SWAT mentality is what we deserve. And you say, well, why, Dave? Why do you say that we deserve? Why do we deserve that? Why do we deserve the police state? Why do we deserve terror? This is terrorism. Okay, we have a bomb going off in New York, but what we have when police do that, when police in Chattanooga serving Mayor Andy Burke, when they do that, what we have is something close to terrorism. Now, the distinction between criminal gangs and police and security services is brought up as the future. And that is in this book by Martin Van Krel, which I've read very, very carefully. This book is kind of battered. I'll always have it with me as I'm looking into it. I haven't read every chapter, but I skipped ahead to find out how it turns out, right? And what's going to happen is that as nation states devolve, there will be an increasing similarity among criminal gangs, security services, and police agencies. They will be almost indistinguishable. And what we have today, since Ferguson, is the terror state. The terror state that can kill people with the approval of the district attorney. Neil Pinkston, the district attorney, approves of perjury. He approves of it. And we're talking here about the case we covered in 2016 between Hanson Melvin and David Campbell, who was fired, and Rochelle Gelpin, another victim of the police of Chattanooga. And they were perjured against by two officers. One was fired, the other one was just let go. And we know that there is a complicity. These are all state actors, okay? They're all state actors in the fellowship of the finger of accusation against me, right? They're pointing at me, and they're pointing at you. And I have a call. I do thank you for ringing me. The number, by the way, is 800-8949, 800-8949. And you have 10 seconds. What's on your mind?
All police should be disarmed. It's obvious. After viewing that video, Second Amendment does not apply to the government. It applies to us. It's a protection from them. And in the conversation with a former FBI agent, talking about terrorism, I said, you mean Bill Clinton murdering 76 people? Every time government gets a chance, it will react violently. And only we, the people, should be armed, not the government. If you get a check from government, you don't get to have a gun. Thanks.
Well, I think that's a great point. There should be a disarmament, and who should call for it? The black clergy Why are black clergymen in Chattanooga not demanding disarmament? Why are they not demanding it? And the next step is no more uniforms. Officers should have a badge. They should be dressed in suits. They should not have any weapons. They should not have any armor. They should not be dressed in military-style form. They should not carry weapons. They should not carry machine guns. And if there's a criminal, believe me, they're smart enough to find him without all the appurtenances of warfare. Because sometimes with 500 of these people in Chattanooga, the people, especially in the government slum where blacks live, they feel terror. They feel fear.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7.